In March 2026, the world's richest nations decided to crack open their emergency oil piggy banks, dump 400 million barrels onto the market, and pray that physics, economics, and human greed would all just cooperate. Spoiler alert, this turned out to be a terrible idea. Right now, as you're watching this, governments are selling off oil they spent decades stockpiling for a genuine doomsday scenario. 400 million barrels. That sounds like an ocean of crude, right? Here's the thing. The world burns through roughly 100 million barrels every single day. So this record-breaking, headline-dominating, history-making release, it covers about 4 days. 4 days. That's like draining your entire savings account to cover 1 week of rent and calling it a financial strategy. And yet every major news outlet is running the same headline. Crisis averted, prices stabilizing, everything is fine. But here's where it gets wild. Let me give you the simplest possible version of what's happening. Imagine your neighborhood has one water pipe. Just one, and it supplies every house on the street. Now, imagine someone parks a tank on top of that pipe. No water. Panic. So the city says, hey, don't worry, we've got a water tower. We'll open the valve. Water flows again, everyone cheers. But nobody moved the tank. The pipe is still crushed. And that water tower? It's not infinite. That pipe is the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow choke point between Iran and Oman where roughly 20% of the world's oil passes through every single day. The tank is the ongoing conflict that has effectively shut it down. And the water tower is the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the emergency stash that countries like the US, Japan, and Europe have been filling for exactly this kind of nightmare. The IEA just opened that valve to the widest it's ever been. And this turned out to be a terrible idea. Let me explain why. Quick history lesson. Strategic petroleum reserves exist because of the 1973 oil embargo, when Arab nations cut off supply to the West and gas lines stretched for miles. Countries said never again and started filling underground salt caverns with millions of barrels of crude. The US alone built a reserve that once held over 700 million barrels. The idea was simple. If supply gets cut off, we have a buffer. A national insurance policy. But here's the problem with insurance. It only works if you don't use it every time you stub your toe. In 2011, reserves were tapped during the Libyan civil war. In 2022, the US released a record 180 million barrels after Russia invaded Ukraine. And now, in 2026, the IEA is coordinating a 400 million barrel release across member nations because the Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed. Each time, the reserves get lower. Each time, refilling gets more expensive. And each time, politicians act like they just invented the solution. But little did they know, the math was about to get very ugly. When the IEA announced the release, markets reacted exactly how you'd expect. Oil prices dipped, headlines celebrated. Politicians held press conferences. The message was clear. We've got this under control. Traders on Wall Street popped open their sparkling waters. Energy ministers gave interviews about international cooperation. And for a brief, beautiful moment, it looked like the adults were in charge. Gas prices at the pump even ticked down a few cents in some countries. Everyone exhaled. See, the system works. But here's what nobody mentioned in those press conferences. The release doesn't add new oil to the planet. It just moves oil from government storage tanks to the market. It's like transferring money from your savings to your checking account and telling everyone you got a raise. The total amount of accessible oil didn't change. What changed is that governments now have less of a safety net. And the traders? Oh, the traders noticed. Within 72 hours, futures contracts started climbing again. Because the market isn't stupid. It can do basic division. 400 million divided by 100 million per day equals 4 days of breathing room. And the Strait of Hormuz was still closed. And this, yes, you guessed it, turned out to be a terrible idea. Here's something most people don't realize. Crude oil is not gasoline. You can't pour crude into your car. It has to be refined. And refining capacity is, let's say, a slight problem. Actually, it's a massive structural crisis that's been building for years. The US hasn't built a major new refinery since 1977. Europe has been closing refineries to meet climate targets. And the refineries that do exist? They're already running at over 90% capacity. So when the government floods the market with crude oil, it's like dumping 1,000 pounds of raw wheat onto a town that only has one bakery. The bakery can only bake so many loaves per day. The wheat just piles up. Crude oil prices might dip temporarily, but the refined products, gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, the stuff that actually powers your life, those prices barely budge. In fact, refinery margins the profit refiners make per barrel have been skyrocketing. Refiners are making record profits while consumers see almost no relief. And here's the twist that makes this truly painful. Some of that released crude doesn't even stay in the country that released it. It gets exported, sold to the highest bidder on global markets. So American taxpayer-funded emergency oil can end up being refined in India and sold as diesel in Singapore. The reserve gets emptier. Your gas price stays high. And somewhere, a refinery executive is buying a third yacht. But the scariest part? We haven't even talked about who really pays for all of this. Meanwhile, on Wall Street, oil futures traders are having the time of their lives. Volatility is a trader's best friend. And right now, volatility is through the roof. Every rumor about the Strait reopening sends prices down. Every satellite image of an Iranian warship sends them back up. Hedge funds are placing billion-dollar bets on both directions. Some of them are making money whether oil goes up or down. They don't care about your commute. They care about the spread. Meanwhile, in Washington, politicians are in full damage control mode. Midterm pressure is building. Approval ratings are sinking faster than the SPR levels. The playbook is familiar. Announce the release, take credit for any price dip, blame speculators when prices rise again. One senator actually said, and I quote, "We are providing immediate relief to hardworking families." The immediate relief was about 11 cents per gallon, for about a week. Meanwhile, at Jay's kitchen table, the math is brutal. Jay drives 40 miles to work. Gas just hit $5.60 a gallon. Groceries are up 14% because everything ships by truck. Jay's airline tickets for a family vacation doubled. The heating bill is up 30%. And Jay just heard on the news that the government is solving the problem. Jay looks at the grocery receipt, looks at the gas pump, looks at the news anchor smiling, and thinks, who exactly is this solved for? Because it sure isn't solved for Jay. Now here's the part that should genuinely make you angry. After the emergency release, the reserves need to be refilled. That's not optional. It's national security. An empty strategic reserve is like a fire department with no water. So the government has to buy oil to put back in storage. But when do they buy it? After the crisis, when prices are still elevated, potentially even higher than when they sold. The US sold emergency oil during the 2022 Ukraine crisis at around $95 a barrel. It then tried to refill at lower prices but struggled because, surprise, demand kept prices up. Some barrels were repurchased at $79, which sounds like a win, until you realize the reserve went from 600 million barrels down to around 415 million and still hasn't fully recovered. Now, we're releasing again, from an already depleted reserve. At prices above $100 per barrel. And we'll need to refill at whatever price the market demands later. Who pays for that refill? You do. Through taxes, through inflation, through a weaker national safety net. It's a financial trap disguised as relief. You get 11 cents off at the pump today, and you pay thousands in higher taxes and reduced energy security tomorrow. And the funniest part? Well, not funny. The most darkly ironic part? The people who designed this system genuinely thought it would work. And this, for the final time, turned out to be a terrible idea. So what's the real lesson here? Emergency oil releases are painkillers, not cures. They treat the symptom, the price spike, while ignoring the disease, dependence on a single choke point, decades of underinvestment in refining, and the political addiction to short-term fixes. The Strait of Hormuz has been a known vulnerability for 50 years. 50 years, and the best plan we have is to drain our savings account and hope for the best. The real fix is boring. It's unglamorous. It's diversifying energy sources, building refining capacity, investing in alternatives, and pursuing diplomatic solutions to conflicts before they shut down 20% of global oil supply. But boring doesn't win elections. Boring doesn't make headlines. So instead, we get 400 million barrels of theater, and humans, as always, never learn. Until the next crisis, when the reserve is even emptier, the prices are even higher, and someone in a suit stands at a podium and says, "We are releasing emergency oil to provide immediate relief." And Jay will be sitting at that kitchen table, doing the same math, getting the same answer. If this video helped you understand what's really happening behind the oil headlines, hit subscribe and the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Drop a comment. Do you think this release will actually stabilize prices, or are we just kicking the can down the road? I read every comment. Share this with someone who's wondering why gas prices won't come down despite the so-called fix. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.